When the first settlers arrived in North America, the great majority of our continent was covered with luxurious, life-giving forests and tall prairie grasses. The air was clear, the water was pure, and wildlife abounded everywhere. Today, when you fly over most of our country, you see most of our forests and prairies are gone. And they've been cleared not for asphalt and cities, but for grazing and cropland. Now you might say, well, we have to grow food to eat, but the reality is that most of the grain that we grow in this country is not eaten by people. We feed it to animals. 80% of the corn eaten in America is eaten by animals. And 90% of the soybean crops, 90% of the oats are fed to animals. Okay, I want you to imagine that you are marooned all by yourself on a desert island. It's just you, and you are responsible for growing your own food. If you were growing grains to feed yourself, you'd have to farm about 1/6 of an acre. But if you were growing grains to feed to a cow in order to eat beef, you're going to have to farm 12 times that much land. And farming all that extra land in America is changing the face of our country.
I remember how shocked I was the first time I saw a feedlot. It was a vivid experience of how the food that we choose profoundly affects the environment. When we think of cattle, most of us picture John Wayne and the open range where the cattle eat grass. As early as 6 or 8 months of age, thousands of cattle are brought together to be confined and fattened. A feedlot is an assembly line for producing meat. Feeding grains instead of grass produces meat with the fat and the marbling that Americans have come to prefer. The modern feedlot often produces something else.
The total livestock population in the United States outweighs the human population by 4 times, and they produce an enormous amount of manure.
One of the things that's happened is that the waste that results from a feedlot, for example, of say 20,000 animals, can end up being as much waste as the whole city of Albuquerque. So what happens is the waste goes into the ground or into the groundwater or into the surface streams, waste that can be destructive and harmful.
All of our cows are washed daily, every time they're milked. From the wash bin, we get a lot of washed manure. That's the water that runs off of the animal after the manure has been washed off of them. It's a major problem because the water has to saturate down into the ground. And there's a fear that we are putting those nitrates down to the drinking water level.
When a dairy is surrounded by farms, the manure may be useful to neighbors. But when cities grow up all around, the manure can become a menace.
The Water Quality Control Board came out and tested our water, and they said it was contaminated with nitrates. And we were like really shocked. And then we started wondering about the health effects for our children.
Carol Close and her family live near another dairy in Southern California. She wonders whether her child's birth defects could have been caused by nitrates in the water.
Just try to imagine what could happen if people were to eat less meat in this country. It would relieve the pressure to grow more crops to feed to the livestock. And as a consequence, those croplands could be reforested to the tunes of tens of millions of acres, which could help even the global warming situation.
With a healthy forest, we have a continuing supply of lumber to build our houses. A healthy forest takes oxygen and places it into the air, takes carbon dioxide out of the air. It stabilizes the topsoil, it purifies the water, it provides a home for wildlife to bring in the tourists. A healthy forest is worth far more than an acre of grass with a cow on it. Just letting the forest come back would be a wonderful use for these lands.